Hello everyone. With all cards from Hearthstone's Journey to Un'Goro expansion revealed, we can finally build some decks around them and theorycraft on what kind of decks we can build with now that we have the whole picture. The Druid legendary quest directs Druid into playing more expensive minions, a bit of a slower style, maybe somewhat reminiscent of Jade Druid, which I also expect to see play continuously. But the expansion does give some tools for also more aggressive approaches to Druid. And in this video, I want to take a look at what kind of tools we have to build some kind of token Druid, aggro Druid, egg Druid lists, and what those lists might look like in the Journey to Un'Goro meta. First of all, any discussion of aggro tools in Journey to Un'Goro just has to start with Bittertide Hydra. It's all Fel Reaver all over again. Bittertide Hydra, a 5-mana 8/8 beast. With the drawback, whenever this minion takes damage, deal 3 damage to your hero. Compare this to the old favorite of aggro druid, the Fel Reaver, which was from the Goblins and Gnomes expansion, so it's in wild currently. It was a 5-mana 8/8 mech, with whenever your opponent plays a card, discard the top 3 cards of your deck. Okay, so they both sound like they might have pretty big drawbacks. In reality though, Fel Reaver drawback was not much of a drawback. I mean, think about it, your deck is randomized anyway. So even though you're going to lose cards from your deck, as long as you don't run out of cards, it's completely meaningless. Those cards could have come out in any order anyway, so discarding cards from the deck doesn't actually affect the game in any way until the point where you run out of cards. That was a typical mistake people made when playing against Fel Reaver. They tried to mill you, they tried to make you lose as many cards as possible, and then they used their resources ineffectively, and as long as they couldn't mill all the cards from your deck, so you still had cards left, as long as Fel Reaver didn't actually punish you at all. This is a bit unlike the Hydra. The Hydra can punish you. 3 damage every time it takes damage. So let's say the opponent is able to kill the Hydra by dealing 1 damage at a time to it, for a total of 8 damage, and that means 24 to your face. Now that's some fairly real punishment, and in smaller portions at least that punishment is going to be dished out in many cases when you play the Hydra. But then again, if you lose 6 health or 9 health, you probably don't care if you're an aggressive deck. So I think this is a really good card and it's definitely going to see play. Some kind of lessons we can learn from the old age of Fel Reaver. One key thing was that you never want to play 2 Fel Reavers on the board at the same time, unless you have the kill in your sight. If you played 2 Fel Reavers on the board, you were almost guaranteed to lose the entire rest of your deck, then you would be down to whatever cards you had, and if those were answered somehow, you would have nothing left. In a similar fashion, if you play 2 Hydras on the board, and the opponent happens to be running some area of effect damage or something like that, you're looking at just dying. So committing 2 Hydras at the same time requires you to be extremely certain on what you're doing. The nightmare scenario for a Hydra user is facing a control shaman who's running Volcano, because that would be a very effective way to kill the Hydra and deal a ton of damage. But I don't expect that to be a very common scenario, so Hydra looks really solid. The next reprint, this seems to be a set full of these kind of small variations, is the Devilsaur Egg. The Devilsaur Egg is a 3-mana 0/3 with a death rattle to summon a 5/5 Devilsaur, which is a beast. It's a reprint of the old favorite of Zoo and Egg Druid, the Nerubian Egg, which was a 2-mana 0/2 that summoned a 4/4 Nerubian as a death rattle. And the Devilsaur Egg is somewhat worse than the Nerubian Egg. The power of Nerubian Egg was largely from the fact that you could already drop it down on 2, and often you would have a way to activate it on 3. So on 3 you would have both the minion that you play and a 4/4 Nerubian, giving you really big tempo swing extremely early in the game. Devilsaur Egg comes out 1 turn later, it also has one more health, so actually it's harder to kill off. There are less minions that you can trade that into if you can buff it somehow to give it some attack so that you can attack with it and trade it away. But that 3 health just might keep it alive against more minions. So the Devilsaur Egg is not quite as powerful as the Nerubian Egg was, because the tempo swing comes a little bit later and it's a little bit more difficult to achieve. But it's still a great card. And when we think about aggressive Druid strategies, the Devilsaur Egg itself is not a beast, but the Devilsaur, the 5/5 that comes out, that one is a beast. And if you have a way to proc the Devilsaur, and then you happen to have, say, a Mark of Yashurash in your hand, you can give that Devilsaur +2/+2 and draw a card. That's some strong synergy there as well. If we take a look outside of the Druid class for a while, Devilsaur Egg also looks like it could be a key card in enabling a non-discard variety of Zoo, should that kind of thing still be viable. Because the non-discard Zoo could play Devilsaur Egg on 3 into a Ravenous Pterodactyl on 4. And at best on 4 they would have on board a 5/5 from the Egg and a 7/7 from the double adapted Pterodactyl. So there's some really interesting applications around the Egg. It's great synergies both for Warlock in Zoo and also for Druid. And even more so for the Druid because of the Beast tag. So that's a key improvement over the Nerubian Egg when we look at aggressive Druids. Carrying on the reprints, we have the Ravasaur Runt. The Ravasaur Runt is a 2-mana 2/2 that has a battle cry: if you control at least 2 other minions, adapt. And if you adapt this, well, you could pick, say, Divine Shield. And I have heard that a 2-mana 2/2 with a Divine Shield used to be a pretty good card. Of course, Ravasaur Runt is conditional. You need to have those 2 other minions on the board. So will you actually be able to play this on 2? For many decks it doesn't look like that. You may be able to play 2 minions on 1, but having one of them survive until 2 in order to trigger the Ravasaur Runt seems like a pretty tall order. So it's a little bit more difficult to play with than the shielded minibot was. But on the other hand, it has the Beast tag, which is again something Druid loves. Mark of Yashurash. Great combination again. And if you think about playing something like an Egg Druid, you are probably going to find yourself in a situation very early in the game where you actually have 2 minions on the board. So Ravasaur Runt looks like a pretty solid addition to the Egg Druid archetype. And the reprints, or little variations, they just keep coming. Next up we have the Eggnapper. Eggnapper is a 3-mana 3/1 with a death rattle to summon 2 1/1 raptors, which are beasts. The Eggnapper itself doesn't have a tribe tag, but the raptors are beasts. And so you can compare this to an old favorite, the 2-mana 1/2 with a death rattle to summon 1/1's the Haunted Creeper, which used to be a key card in Egg Druid and in Zoo. It's a little doubtful whether Eggnapper is going to be able to repeat this success though. It costs 1 mana more, and 1 mana is a big deal, and it has a significant downside in having only 1 health. But it also has some pretty big potential upsides. Because of the 3 attack, if your opponent doesn't have a good way to deal that 1 damage, then the 3 attack minion is able to trade very effectively. And also, the death rattle summons 2 1/1 beasts, which is again great for some classes, such as Druid. Mark of Yashura's targets. There are a lot of stuff here that summons beasts as a death rattle, or that are beasts, so lots of potential applications, lots of potential targets for Mark of Yashurash, which then will give an aggressive Druid deck that tempo swing, as well as card draw. So I'm not willing to count Eggnapper out just yet. That 1 health is a drawback, but the high attack and the fact that the death rattle summons beasts are pretty big advantages as well. So I'm confident that Eggnapper deserves a try. I'm not sure if it's going to be good enough, but it's definitely something that might turn out to be just fine. I already took a look at Shellshifter when I was talking about slower Druid archetypes earlier, but Shellshifter is such a flexible card that I think that it's also going to find a spot in more aggressive Druid strategies. Both of the forms of the Shellshifter are beasts, again great with Mark of Yashurash. And you get to choose. I mean, if you're in an aggro mirror, for example, you can play this 4-mana 3/5 taunt. You have Sentient Shield Master in your deck for a mirror match. Okay, that sounds pretty good, blocking some of that damage from the opposing aggro deck. And then if you're facing a control deck, then you can slam down that 5/3 stealth, which is also a beast. So it's going to live a turn, so it's going to get that attack in. So this one looks like a very strong card that allows your deck to both play against other aggro decks and also apply a lot of pressure to control decks. Druid also receives a new buff card, the Evolving Spores, which is a 4-mana spell to adapt your minions. Adapt your minions in this case means that you get one adapt selection, and that same adaptation is going to be applied to all of your minions. In other words, you have a 30% chance to find a permanent Bloodlust, +3 attack to all of your minions permanently. Some interesting stuff that can happen with this card. On the other hand, that also means that, let's say you want to pick the +1/+1 stats adapt. Well, Druid has Mark of the Lotus, which is +1/+1 stats to all your minions for 1 mana. Or maybe you want to pick up the Death Rattle, summon 2 1/1s. Well, Druid already has a 4-mana spell that gives its minions Death Rattle, Soul of the Forest, which gives all of your minions Death Rattle to summon a 2/2. Which I consider to be better than summoning 2 1/1s, especially if you have a large board already, because in that case you will not be able to utilize those 1/1s nearly as effectively, and some of them will not be able to be summoned because you will run out of space. So Evolving Spores has some really interesting things going for it, but it's also facing very stiff competition from existing buff cards. So I'm not sure whether it's going to deserve a spot in a deck or not. It's something that needs to be experimented on. Finally, one of the most interesting cards in the whole Journey to Un'Goro expansion, which is Living Mana. Living Mana is a 5-mana spell that transforms your mana crystals into 2/2 minions, with a Death Rattle to gain an empty mana crystal. So with this card you can get your lands, your mana crystals, to fight for you. Living Mana comes with a number of strings attached. First, you cannot transform temporary mana crystals. So let's say you want to play this on 3 with an Innervate. You can Innervate out a 5-mana spell, but in this case it would take away all your mana crystals and give you 3 minions, not 5, because temporary mana crystals are not transformed into minions. Second, Living Mana only transforms as many mana crystals as you have space on the board. So let's say you play this on turn 10 or at 10 mana on an empty board. So you will pay the 5 mana for this spell. It will transform 7 of your mana crystals into minions, and you will have 3 mana remaining. There are actually quite interesting applications controlling your board size and controlling the number of minions you gain from Living Mana. Because say you play that 10 mana, you have 1 minion on the board, so there are 6 spaces remaining. You play this, you lose 6 mana crystals, they become Trents, then you still have 4 mana left, so you could play a Soul of the Forest and give all of those minions a Death Rattle to summon another 2/2. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on with Living Mana, and working on how many mana crystals you're going to convert, how much mana do you want to have remaining, what do you want to do with that. It's really interesting. Other thing to note about Living Mana is that when the minions die, the mana crystals come back to you empty. So okay, if you summon this big board and the opponent deals with it immediately on their turn, then the mana crystals come back empty on the opponent's turn and they are refreshed at the start of your turn. However, if for some reason you have to be the one making the trade, so you attack these minions next turn into opponent's minions, then you will get those mana crystals back empty, so you will not have that mana at your disposal on the following turn. Obviously, that's a scary board that you build with living mana, so it's likely that the opponent will have to deal with it. So you don't have to worry about that kind of thing, and if they survive until next turn, then you just go face or something. But still, that's something to be aware of. There are 2 cards in the game that can severely punish you for playing living mana. Those are Priest's Mass Dispel, which silences all minions, and if all minions are silenced, they no longer have the death rattle, so you will never get the mana back. You just have to rebuild your mana 1 turn at a time. Essentially, the opponent is playing the late game and you're playing early game from that point on, so you have lost. Most likely anyway. And the second card that can really punish you, which is the bigger threat I think, because Priest is not played that much and Mass Dispel is not played in Priest that much either, but Shaman's Devolve. And Devolve is a card that is currently seeing a lot of play, so that's an actual risk. And if the opponent devolves your Treants, they become 1 mana minions and they lose the death rattle and you will not get your mana back. So that's an actual risk. I don't think either of these is a showstopper. The existence of these 2 cards doesn't mean that living mana is unplayable. Quite the contrary, living mana seems to be pretty strong. But it's good to be aware of the possibilities that you may have in certain matchups that you can really be punished for playing that. So what would an actual deck look like when we use these tools and the existing cards and try to put something together? For example, an Egg Druid. Egg Druid is a different zoo-like way of playing Druid. So you're trying to have a big board, you're making a sticky board, you have death rattles going, you have minion buffs going. It plays a very, very board-centric game, and then finishes off the opponent with a Savage Roar. And Egg Druid is gaining a lot more than it's losing in this expansion. It's gaining stuff like Devilsaur Egg, which is a perfect fit. Ravasaur Runt looks also excellent for this deck. Eggnapper, although that's one card that I'm unsure about its power level, but it just might find a home in Egg Druid. And living mana, of course. Yet another way to fill the board. So Egg Druid is gaining a lot here. It's losing some cards as well, like the Dragon Egg. But overall it's gaining a lot and looks very interesting to look at what kind of an Egg Druid list we could build. So this example that I have built is pretty basic Egg Druid of the current era. It's running the Bloodsteel Corsair Patches combo, which of course in the upcoming meta depends on the popularity of weapons. Bloodsteel Corsair has been very good here because weapons are quite popular, so you probably get to remove charge from a weapon and you get your patches out, you thin your deck and you create 2 minions. Because Egg Druid really loves to create multiple minions, so that it can then buff them and give them death rattles and stuff like that. But there's stuff like this Devilsaur Egg, Eggnapper, Ravasaur Runt. A lot of pretty powerful and resistant plays that you can make, so it looks pretty interesting overall. Egg Druid is not the only way to build a token strategy with Druid. Egg Druid is the most aggressive, the one with the lowest curve. But you could also go for a bit higher curve. You can go with stuff like Violet Teachers and stuff like Live-In Mana, so that you build those tokens a little bit later in the game. You have a little bit more power in the deck, but you're also a little bit slower. And that being a little bit slower might end up punishing. Because currently when people are playing these kinds of beast token Druid decks, one of the absolute key cards is Druid of the Saber. It's a 2-drop with stealth, so you have a really good target for Mark of Yashuraj on 3 if you need that. It's just a great card for gaining that early board control, or at the very least contesting the board early so that you can then come back into it with Violet Teachers. But Druid of the Saber is rotating out and there doesn't seem to be a very good substitute for that. Ravasaur Runt doesn't really work in a slower deck because then you will not be able to play that on 2. You probably can't even play that on 3. So there are quite a few risks involved. But on the other hand, this kind of bit slower deck could also find room for Bittertide Hydras. So you can have a bunch of tokens and you can have these 8/8s as well punching the face of the opponent. Giving this a way to attack from multiple directions. It's an interesting archetype to be sure. Losing that 2-drop does hurt it a lot, so I'm a little bit unsure. And also, regarding the Bittertide Hydra, it can find a home in this kind of a deck that's built around tokens a lot, fairly aggressive, or it might also be possible to build a more straightforward aggro Druid deck that doesn't really want tokens, but it's all out aggro, and that could also use the Hydra. Maybe that might even be a better home for it. Druid has some support for these aggressive and token type strategies as well, and it's going to be really interesting to see if any of those end up being viable. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the show, please click the like button and subscribe to my channel for more.